Yeah, okay, I'm gonna get us opened up here. And as some of you know, and others will learn, I tend to um, use a little sage when opening up, right? So as we come into the space, I am just going to burn just a bit of sage and ask you all so it can be seen to invite the indigenous ancestors of this land into the space, recognizing them and recognizing that wherever we may be in this country, that we're on indigenous lands, giving honor to them and giving honor to your ancestors. Thinking about all of your ancestors that came before you. If we think about your four grandparents and your eight
Mm-mm.
great-grandparents and your 16 great-great-grandparents and your 32 great-great-great-grandparents, and knowing if we go back, I think it is 7 generations or something like that, we come around to a number of like 4,092 or somewhere in there of ancestors that each of us has had, that has had the opportunity to live, to laugh, to love, and to struggle. Honoring them and thinking about their dreams, their hopes, their faiths, and how that has manifested itself in us. Honoring my ancestors and asking my ancestors that would do good for me to guide my thoughts, my words, and my actions. Giving honor to them. And also giving honor to the 7 directions, the north, the south, the east, the west, the heavens above us, this spaceship that we call Earth, that even though we may feel like we are sitting still, to recognize that we're actually traveling thousands of miles an hour through time and space. And the 7th direction, which is the most important, is the one that points within to our hearts and gives us the ability to self-reflect, to reflect on who we are and whose we are and how we show up in the world. With that, to bring everyone into circle, what I'm going to simply ask is that everyone just unmute at the same time and just speak your name into the space. Everybody just unmute and speak your name into the space.
Joe.
Gracie
Saturation.
Counselor.
Holy Fury.
Jefferson Butler.
Thank you, thank you, thank you all. Thank you. It is wonderful to have you all here with me in the space. Um, and I am going to just go ahead and get started. I don't know if there is anyone here older than me, so I can ask permission. Well, there is. May I have permission to speak?
Yes, you may.
Thank you so much. And Denise, let me say it's so wonderful to see you. Yes, thank you. So, we've already talked about the fact that we're recording and all of that stuff. So why are we here? So today is really it's meant to be like a little bit of a tickler, right? To say because I have a 3-part series that's coming up, right? So this is to give a little information as to what we will begin in that 3-part series. Um, and that I would like for you all, as well as others that you may know, if you can spread the word and encourage folks to sign up for it. And I said that it's a beginning because ultimately this work is a lifelong journey, right? And it's really complicated and complex, right? So it takes time to really for it to sink in and for us to move with it. So others are coming in. I am going to share screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, great, great. Welcome, Cynthia. It's good to see you. Tiana, welcome, welcome. Okay. So okay, let's get this straight. So this series is called Roots and Resonance, right? Harnessing cultural identity for leadership and growth. And this is an introduction to what we have named mature global citizens, right? Mature global citizenship. And this mature global citizens is really a movement that we are beginning. Right. And we want to get as many people involved as possible. Now, how did this come about? And a lot of the work that I have done around critical conversations of race, equity, intersectionality, access, all of that stuff, difference, right? One of the things that comes up, especially as I think sometimes the defense mechanism is people will say, well, we're all human. And that's something that I have uh, questioned and acknowledged at the same time, right? Because my belief is that just because we're born doesn't mean that we're human. I believe that being human is a maturation process. How do we grow? How do we mature? How do we live into this this concept called humanity, right? And when we think about our brain development, people always will talk about the amygdala back in the back and talk about that's the animal part, right? So, okay, so we are a human animal, and then the question becomes, how do we then mature into our humanity, right? So now here's a little bit about mature global citizens. Humanity thrives when we recognize our fundamental interconnectedness. Every life holds inherent value and dignity, and we are strongest when guided by compassion, respect, and shared responsibility for our world. True leadership calls us to be stewards of the earth, to live with kindness, and to pursue harmony across all relationships. Through intentional acts, both large and small, we shape a future where love, courage, and empathy binds us together as we collectively reach for a world where we all can flourish. That's what we believe. The vision of this is a world where all people and communities live with dignity and purpose, united through compassion, mutual respect, and ethical responsibility, honoring the interconnectedness of all life for present and future generations. What our mission is to cultivate mature global citizens who lead with both soul and strategy. We develop leaders who can navigate complexity with wisdom, bold bridges, build bridges across difference, and create sustainable cultures of equity and belonging through a ready to be framework, which is race equity, accessibility, and access. Difference belonging, and being. We transform how people show up in the world. So that's the concept, the what we believe, vision, and mission of mature global citizens. Let's dive a little bit deeper because there are several components of all of this in this work, right? The next component is, cultural identity development. Who are we? Right. One of the things that I believe has happened is we often conflate social identity with cultural identity, right? And this is where some of the work that we need to do. So there's a concept called Ubuntu. How many here are familiar with Ubuntu? Have heard it before? They should be. Okay. Okay, great. So what it basically means is I am because we are. Now, as we dive deeper into that, part of that is saying that it is our difference that holds us together, right? And, oftentimes when we talk about our society and our world as we live in it today, the issue that I see most often coming up is the fact that we don't deal with difference well, right? Uh, there's some that is in this idea around the original phrasing was diversity, right? And for me doing the work, what I often found is that when organizations was doing that work, it was really about people looking different, not about the differences that often show up in us. Right. And that's where the human complexity often comes in and how we deal and work with one another. Oftentimes in the work, I have found that I have to start with emotional development with folks to be able to help move or help get the tools necessary for people to stay in conversations about difference and how we work together. Right. And one of the things that I'd like for us to understand is that it is our skill sets, right, that is the difference between all of us because all of us have gifts, purpose, wisdom, understanding, right? And it is understanding that all of our differences is really meant to complement each other, not to set us apart, but to complement us together so we can then come together and work together and be together. Now, part of that is when we begin to pull apart what is social identity versus cultural identity, right? So, social identity is what is imposed upon us from outside, right? Based on our perceived membership in socially constructed groups, right? Depending on the values of this society or what can sometimes be called dominant culture, right? Social identity can have a significant impact on our health and how we are in our lives and how we show up in the world. Now, when we think about cultural identity is really about our ancestry, our heritage, our values, our worldview. And it's how we are in community across time and space. It is rooted in spirituality, historical, and communal traditions of people and how we link together. So the question again goes to who am I and how am I showing up in the world? When I was 12 years old and in school, it was this song out by Casey and the Sunshine Band. Some of you all may be familiar with it, right? It was called Play That Funky Music, White Boy, right? And, here's this light-skinned kid with curly hair. And at that time, I talked very proper, right? So I was often teased about, you acting white. And that really just burned, right? So I did everything that I could to identify with blackness, right? I started talking hip and cool and, um, uh, uh, you know, just changing up things that I was doing to what I perceived as blackness. And one of the things that I also did was I rejected education because I was being teased for doing well and how I was showing up. So I'm like, okay, well, I got to stop doing this, right? And it was really, so, one of the things that I got very proficient at doing, because of course this was all going on in my head and my mother wasn't very accepting of it. So I became very adaptive, turning F's into B's and C's into D's on my not C. What did I turn C's into? C's into B's. No, F's into B's and C's. What does a C? I can't remember. I can't remember. But anyway, I I rejected education. I stopped performing. In high school, I never did homework. Right. I never did homework. And later in life, as I decided to reinvigorate an academic career and go into it and begin to get my master degrees, I began to question and look at and to understand, why did I educate, not being educated with blackness? What was the social cues, the social identity that was coming into me that made my mind connect rejecting education, not doing well, and blackness? Right. That bewildered me for years. And recently, and this is part of this lifelong journey, right? Recently, I realized that it wasn't so much that I identified not getting an education with blackness, but it was my rejection of whiteness that was happening within me, right? Now, that was a recent revelation within like the last 2 weeks and thinking about this, right? So, again, this lifelong journey. So, it's still some processing that has to happen around that. So, understanding who we are, and in my journey, I've gone through several iterations. I think when I was born, I think they began to use the word black on birth certificates, right? I think I was born at the end of the Negro stage, right, or phase. And, so I've grown through that blackness, and I have come to a point of understanding my root cultural identity is as an African, right? Although I do have other ingredients within me. And it is through that I began to understand and began to be able to see how those values and cultural ways of being have been showing up in me. One of the things that I have found in work environments that we don't often understand is, who are we? How are we showing up in the world? Where is our identity coming from, and how is that showing through? And then how is that also impacting how we lead others? Right. So the benefits of cultural identity can be increased understanding of cultural leadership, positive self-image, and a sense of being, cultural preservation, strengthens authenticity and resilience, cross-cultural understanding. How do we know and understand each other, and how do we work to do that? It also helps us to heal the traumas that many of us have experienced from oppression. It's the creation of new narratives, realizing or revitalizing our relationships, not only with ourselves, but with others, practicing emotional wellness, and freeing ourselves from the socialization that has come from this idea of whiteness, right? And one of the things that I think it is so important to understand is that this concept, this idea of whiteness that has been made invisible for so many of us, not only negatively impacts Black folks and other people of color, it also negatively impacts white people. Right. And this is so often why I have felt like a lot of my work has been to take the food coloring and make this thing visible. Because it is only until it is visible and we are aware of it that we can begin to do something different about it. So, and a part of that story, what you all was hearing also was about socialization, right? How we are socialized in this society, what we believe, right? And that comes from many sources, right? It comes from government, society, media, schools, social services, our healthcare system. I mean, everything just it just permeates everything because with this idea of whiteness being the right way, then that also said that everything else was the wrong way. And I, most of you all here, I know, and I know that we all always want to do things the right way. The problem in that is some of our own cultural ways of being has been taught to us as negative, as bad, as uncivilized. So we push away from that. And we now exist in a world that's destroying itself. And our belief with mature global citizens, we have to be able to look back and pull that back in and grab hold of these things that have been deemed negative and begin to see the positive that's there and build a new relationship with it. So part of the thing with this is if I believe that my cultural ways of being is bad and negative and uncivilized, and I reject that, then ultimately I'm also rejecting myself. And we call that internalized oppression, right? So the definition, or when we think about social conditioning, right? Social conditioning is the process by which individuals in a society are taught, influenced, and trained to think, behave, and respond in ways generally accepted by a society or by subgroups within it, right? It involves internalizing norms, values, beliefs, and expectations, right? So, as we all have been functioning in this society, and as I look around, everyone here is functioning at a high level in this society. So that means that there's a level of assimilation and acculturation that we all have been through, that we all have accepted. Question becomes, are we aware of that? Right. I know that many of you here, or probably all of you, have heard of this term called code switching, right? Which is how we show up when we go to workspaces and how we show up when we're not in workspaces, right? Part of my personal mission has been to end code switching, right? How do we begin to accept everyone as who they are, as their authentic self in workspaces? I was at a work in an organization one time, and I had gone in to do some work, and it was around culture and all of that. And I was sitting very quiet, which y'all know is, different for me, right? And when I began to talk, I was very monotone and, non-emotional and all of that. And then I switched right into the regular Kevin, right? And I jumped up and started moving around and was excited. And, everyone, when I was so mounted, everybody was like this. And as soon as I got up, folks just kind of jumped back because it was unexpected. One of the norms and values that has permeated this society has been not mixing emotion into stuff, right? Emotion has been seen as negative, as bad, when ultimately emotion is very good. Emotion is those vibrations that we feel in our stomach sometimes when we say something's not right here. That's emotion, right? Now, part of our being able to show up in workspaces and other spaces.
I need to fax this.
Thank you, Kyrie, but I don't need no facts right now, brother. Um, okay, where was I? Let me get back on track, right? So part of our ability to be our authentic selves is to know who our authentic selves is, right? And that really involves us asking ourselves some deep questions, right? Who am I? Who am I to others? Who are others to me? Who am I in the world? Right? What is my story, my history? When did it begin? Did it begin just a few years ago, or did it begin thousands of years ago? Right. Okay. So part of Well, I got to move my notes around now. Bear with me. So, part of this process, when we think about connecting cultural identity and who we are and how we show up in the world with leadership and leadership development, right? We think of, or we encourage what we call culturally engaged, transformational servant leadership, servant and spiritual leadership and development and coaching. Now, there's a lot in that, right? So many different parts, right? So when we think about this, when we think about the culturally engaged part, right, that really speaks to who am I? Who are we to each other? What is my ability to understand and deal with others and their differences? Right. And what is my willingness to engage and learn about other cultures, other cultural ways of being, and how I show up in the world, right? And how they show up in the world, right? That's one aspect. When we think about transformational servant leadership, right? How can I serve others? And in that service, how does that not only transform others, but how does it also transform myself and how I am and how I show up? Right. when we think about the spiritual part of that, right, is how am I showing up in my humanity and how am I engaging with others and how do I also understand that this work is not only about what's materially seen, but also about what is unseen, right? This energy that moves through ourselves and the world and each other. You know, I had this instrument at one time. I can't remember what it's called, but it when you hold it with both hands, you can see the light shines up, you know, and it means that we have energy and we show energy. So what I would do sometimes in groups is I would have us all stand in a circle and in some way hold each other's hands and then have that at the end to show that we are energy. And when that energy is connected, we light up and we light up the world, right? So here's a few critical aspects of this, or parts of this model, right? Critical self-reflection. Who am I, again, and how do I show up in the world, right? An honest and intentional way of engaging others and not with ego, right? Cultural awareness and engaged responsiveness, understanding how intersectional identities impact staff, leaders on all levels, right? And relational and participatory sharing, sharing power and community-driven decision making and not hoarding power, right? So now all of this, when we begin to put it all together and we think about the socialization that has been experienced in this world and what harms it has caused, right? So when we think about um, colonization, socialization, this invisible thing called whiteness that we want to bring to light in the world, right? The Western norms, the values, the desire for assimilation and acculturation, the impact that that has had on ourselves and the world, right? Regardless of your identity, is psychic trauma, right? Which can lead to alienation, identity fragmentation, and generational trauma. And that shows up in so many ways, right? The impacts of it is anxiety and depression, shame, dissociation, and community fracture on all levels. The way for healing this is through cultural reclamation, narrative healing, telling our stories, working with them, right? And working through all of the emotions that may come with those, from anger to shame to guilt, all of those emotions, right? We have to work through them. Community practices and decolonizing, right? And all of that are the things that will bring us to this leadership model, right, of culturally engaged, transformational servant, and spiritual leadership development. Now, how do we get here, right? Or how do we begin to walk our way out of it, right? Is looking at other ways of being and other frameworks. Here in this process and in this three-part series, right? And it's again, three-part series is just the beginning. It's enough to scratch the surface. And the idea of doing that work will be in with three cohorts, right? We have a cohort for Black people. We have a cohort for people who identify as people of color. And we have a cohort for white people. And we have that because we believe that it's an important that some of these conversations begin in these groups so we can have hard, critical conversations out of the eyes of others. And ultimately know that the goal is, and all of this growth is for us to then be able to come back and have conversations together. Right. So when we look at traditional indigenous ways of being, right, and African and Asian ways of being, it's about unity of the sacred, right? About interconnectedness, about community and living in nature in our cosmos and what all of that means. Whereas this European worldview that we have been living in has been about separation and dualism and individualism and the domination of nature, right? And we're saying that we have to begin to reverse and bring in other ways of being. Now, it is not about totally saying that one is right or one is wrong. It's about bringing balance because right now we're living in a world that is out of balance. So very much like that seesaw. How many of you all was on a seesaw when y'all were younger? Anybody here get on a seesaw? Right. So initially you have to bring awareness to one, it has to go up. Right. And in that process of learning, it eventually comes to balance and being. Or did I skip one? Okay. So again, our process for getting there is about understanding and becoming mature global citizens so that we can come into our full humanity, right? So in this, when I first started floating the idea, someone said, "Well, when I see mature, I think about old people." Right. And I'm like, no, this isn't about old people, right? Because maturing, we often mature differently at all different ages, right? Depending on how we engage with things, right? So understanding here in this context, when we think about maturity, we're thinking about emotional integration, ancestral wisdom, understanding trauma-informed wellness and spiritual groundedness, right? When we think about global, we think about the planetary consciousness, right? All of us together, decolonize, decolonizing universalism, right? Because this idea of whiteness that has showed up in the world has said that it has been spread across everything as the universal right way, which means that my ways of being is wrong. Other ways of being is wrong, right? So how do we begin to decolonize that and say that how do we blend all ways of being and thinking so that we all can work, live, and be together and work with our differences, right? Citizens is about, being in beloved community, right? Understanding our different cultural ways of being and how we show up in the world. What are our values of empathy and love and connection, right? And ultimately, holding all of this together is about holding complexity, practicing interdependence, embodying justice, right? Honoring difference and stewarding a future that is not only for ourselves, but for 7 generations ahead. Ultimately, to do all of this, we have to work to change our mindset, which is not easy. We generally call this an adaptive challenge, right? Because changing the mindset is really about changing what we think, how we believe, and how we then behave, right? So I believe that this is important because ultimately leadership development is what that leadership development that integrates cultural identity and heals and heal. Woo, let me start this over again if I can, right? Let me just read it so I say it right. Leadership development that integrates cultural identity and healing transforms leaders from managers of systems into stewards of humanity. Right. Leaders who heal themselves through understanding how I am, how I became who I am, right? Understanding how others may see me, right? Then impacts how I show up in the world, right? So leaders who heal themselves from colonial socializations are less likely to to reproduce oppressive systems, right? Because we often say, how do we get out of these systems? How do we change systems? Not understanding, connecting that systems are made up of people. And if we want systems to change, people have to change. Oftentimes I see leaders looking to staff to do things differently, but leaders don't do anything different at all, right? That has to change, right? Leaders who are rooted in cultural identity bring authenticity and resilience to their roles. Leaders who embed healing in their practices create organizational cultures that are sustainable, equitable, and humanizing. So, again, I spoke a little bit about it, but th these are some of the topics and the things that we will be getting into in these cohorts, right? When we go through this three-part system, right? Why three cohorts? Again, because what I have found is that sometimes harm happens when we try to have some of these conversations together. So I wanted to create opportunity for these groups to have conversations and do some work to build understanding so that eventually we can get to a point of having conversations together. Right. And the cohorts, again, is for Black people, for other people of color, and then for white people. In this work, we will explore identity. Who am I in the world? Right? Who am I from a cultural standpoint versus a social standpoint? What and how have I been impacted from cultural loss? Right? What have I not learned from history? How has suppressing my cultural ways impacted me? And that's whether we are Ghanaian or we are French or Irish. Right. How has this impacted me? How have I been miseducated in this society? What have I not been taught and what have I been taught wrong? What is the impact of all of this on me? Understanding again that this is a lifelong journey. I see some colleagues on here that I know do similar work, right? And people always call us for these one part miracle sessions that's going to heal everything, and it's like, it doesn't exist. This is work that we have to do over a lifetime. And it is personal work that impacts us professionally. Because one of the things that I've learned is that everywhere I go, there I am. I cannot separate my personal belief systems from how I show up in the world and how I show up at work. It has an impact. Because maybe I'm not showing up fully in spaces. What's the stress and the health impact of that on me? Resilience. Resiliency is a word that that is so complex, right? And many meanings. Maybe not many meanings, we know what it means, but many aspects of that, right? Because it's more than, how do I come back from some issue that may happen at work? It's how am I impacted by all of these things that happen, and then how do I then show up in the world, right? How do I increase my resiliency? How do I I work with resiliency across multiple sectors? All of this also will bring about this thing called equity, right? And it's how we treat one another. How do we work with difference and how do we understand each other's difference? And all of that collectively will bring about justice, right? And again, in this leadership model that we call culturally engaged, transformational, servant, and spiritual leadership. So here is a outline of the work that will be done in these groups, right? So this is an idea of what each cohort would be working with. Now the questions may vary slightly depending on which cohort you may be in, right? But ultimately we're dealing with the same things, right? Social structures. Who are we to others? Who are we to ourselves, right? Um, and in here, I forgot to change black. I meant to make this very neutral, which I didn't. Made the top neutral, but not the rest of it. So please forgive and understand. Just apply how you may identify right now into this section, right? Uh, how are we all showing up with each other, right? Governance structure. Who are we to each other? And what are the relationships that we have with each other? Ways of knowing. How do we explain our existence and how do these systems that we participate in explain our issues, right? How have we defined ourselves individually and collectively in these systems, right? And how we live, right? Science and technology. How does nature work and how does it shape our world? What are our ways of viewing nature and how do these views shape our existence in the world, right? Movement and memory. How is memory preserved, right? What what have we experienced as we move through time and space, right? How are these memories passed down through generations, right? How is historical and current and future movement through time impact them? And ultimately, how will the work of cultural identity improve our leadership and engagement skills, right? So this is the work that we will begin to do in these cohorts. And I keep throwing the word begin in there because 3 sessions is not nearly enough, right? But it will be enough for us to get the work started. So with that, that is the end of this presentation as an introduction to this 3-part series that I would like for you all and others to engage in. Now, we have finished a little earlier. I moved through that. I'm wondering if there are any questions or thoughts or sharings that's coming up for everyone. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Baker. Thank you for this amazing presentation. I'm curious about the term transformational servant. Could you give us some more?
So probably what I need to put in there is a comma. Right. So it's transformation. So it is ultimately, let me look at it so I say it right. Let me. So ultimately, it's culturally engaged, transformational, servant, and comma, servant and spiritual leadership, right? So when we think about transformational and servant and putting it together, one, how do we work to transform ourselves, right? And then through that servant leadership, how are we also helping to transform others, right? So ultimately, transformational saying that we can't stay the same, right? Through when we think about the self-reflective part that shows up in this, right? With self-reflection comes transformation. If you're really self-reflecting, does that help at all?
Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Others, Cynthia.
Thank you. So mine is more of a comment than a question, just two things. One is, after working with you for all these years, Kevin, I am embracing who I am and doing less code switching. And three things have come out of that. Number one, it's like the stress has been released off of me, right? That I'm more comfortable in the skin that I'm in and I'm okay with it. And if other people aren't, that's their issue, not mine. I didn't create that.
Definitely.
Two, I'm way more impactful and way more uh, the outcomes and way more effective because I'm being true to who I am and I'm okay with that. And so that shines through in the work that I do. The third thing is there's a health component too. So people are saying, I've had some health challenges, but people are saying, oh, Cynthia, your skin and, the brightness of you and, your blood pressure's down and all these other things. And so I'm there's something, it's a lifelong process. You're constantly improving and learning. But when you really get to be your authentic self, it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
And I just want to encourage people to think about this too. If you as a leader don't create this space for yourself and for your others, you're losing on the ability for others to maximize their potential and who they are. And there is a cost to that as well. There is some loss financially, as well as in terms of ability to be humans and engage with each other that you're missing. And just think about that. Like, I'm thinking about how more effective I am now and what that return on investment in, and just in my having had this exposure with Kevin and working through this process to where I am today, right? It's different. And I can actually put a dollar value on it. There's a health component, and then there's just one about me as a person and just how I am and feel good about myself. Food for thought.
Thank you. Thank you. Others. Now, I know most of y'all, and y'all are not quiet folks. So,
I have a couple just logistical questions. With the cohorts, I'm would guess that the facilitators or trainers for each of those cohorts would be also of that identity.
no,
No, not necessarily. Okay,
no. I am the facilitator of all of those cohorts,
got it.
right? And that is because and they should be it should be up on the website soon. There is the total cost is $249, although there's an early bird special of $199 for all three sessions, right? And I think it's until we have until like the 31st or something like that to register for that. The reason for the fact that I would be facilitating it all is because I know the work that I want to do. That's not to say that in the future, as this movement grows, that there won't be others, right? But right now, I understand the work. The other thing um that I have not necessarily agree with all the time is that the only one that can speak to certain groups is people from their group, right? I believe that it's that people can see authenticity and genuineness in how folks show up, right? When I first moved out here, and I see you, Vincent, I'm coming. When I first moved out here, and wanted to do this work, the first thing that people told me, well, you need to find somebody white to work with. And I'm like, why? Because white people ain't gonna listen to you. And I'm like, well, and then that to me that says that there will be no growth and development. Right. Now I think I originally picked that up from Tim Wise and his work. I remember him saying one time that, yeah, y'all paying me, I'm standing up in front, I'm telling you all of this great stuff, but until you can hear this from a black person, then nothing has changed. Right. It's ultimately what happens is we tend to isolate ourselves and our thinking, right? Now, after George Floyd and a lot of things that's been happening, there's been a lot of folks that's, saying, don't come to me for your education, right? White people, don't come to me for your education. And I'm like, if you tell somebody that's in New York to get to LA and you don't give them a roadmap, there's no telling where they're gonna end up, right? Now, I also understand that this part of the work isn't for everyone. I personally believe that I was kind of built for this, right? And I have facilitated multiple, I've facilitated affinity groups from folks with color, white people, black people, everybody, right? And oftentimes people would ask, well, is there a different curriculum for all of the groups? No, because ultimately we all need to learn the same things. It's just the application of the information and how it is brought forward to process that's different, right? So asking the same question to three or four different groups in three or four different ways, right? Based on what is important for that group to learn, grow, and understand. As we grow and learn and understand together, this is a group process, right? Mistakes will be made. Apologies will be given, right? Because that's part of the process. This is complicated. This is lifelong. I'm as much of a learner as everyone else in this. And in my mind, as part of that humility that we need to begin to see in leaders, where a leader can stand up in front of folks and say, I was wrong about this. Let's do something another way. Right. Vincent.
Thank you. How are you addressing the current climate we're in? Right, this is depth work and the language we have in our field, right? Decolonize, just all of it right now.
Right.
And being critical of whiteness, the Kirk murder, like how are you contextualizing this very deep work in this anti all the things we do?
Thank you for the question, because this is something that I have been working with in my head, right? Because sometimes I want to say so much more. And the question is, am I adding to the noise or am I adding solutions? Right. And ultimately, when I think about the world we're in the United States, right, we know that 50% of folks voted for this person, 50% didn't. That tells me that there's 50% of people out there that want to do something different, that want to grow, that want to be. Now, I'm not shying away from the language or doing the group separate or anything like that, because ultimately, uh, I believe that only those that are interested will show up. And if some who want to come and disrupt, then, we'll kick them out and keep it moving. Part of the work that, or one of the questions that I have now that I'd like to talk more about publicly is, where are all of these businesses right now? And are they accepting the fact that we are becoming an outright overt white supremacist country? Right? Are you just going to sit on the sidelines and say nothing? Right? But and a part of it is, when I first moved out here to the Pacific Northwest, and I would be in some meetings and people would ask me, um, what do I miss most about home? And I guess I kind of flew past my introduction of who I am, right, in this thing, right? So I generally tell people I'm from the capital of the Confederacy, right? Two parts, right? Because one, it gives context to my life. The other part is to see who remembers their fifth grade geography, right? It's Richmond, Virginia. And what I would say is that what I miss is overt racism, because you know where people stand. Right. So right now we can see where people stand. And the question becomes, yeah, you're right. We don't have to miss, because it's right there, right? It's right there. And the thing is, not everyone wants to be there. Not everyone wants that, whether they are white, black, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, don't want to be there. Everyone don't want to be there. The issue still exists with, how do we deal with our differences? Because ultimately, and I see you, Doc, I'm coming. Ultimately, I think where we are, there's two parts. One is a backlash. The other part, it speaks to how well the work had been done prior to getting here, right? Were we really doing that well of a job in speaking to it? I know people in this work that would not talk about white supremacy, would not talk about whiteness, would not talk about these things, right? Because if they did, whoever hired them would fire them. My my perspective, I went into every contract I got knowing that I was going to be fired at some point, because it's stuff that we have to deal with, right? But how do we, those of us who want a more humane society, how do we do our work so that when we come out of this crap, we're better positioned to work with and deal with one another and our differences, right? And how are we more able to authentically be ourselves and who we are? I don't know if that's helpful or not. Doc, hold on, Doc, was that helpful, Vincent?
Yeah, I know the pendulum's coming the other way, right? But I think from like the Young Republicans chat to, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's all hanging loose, right? And so
Absolutely.
And the businesses won't speak up because they'll be penalized through the government, right? You know what I mean? Like, and it's such a force right now, such a force that I'm just interested in how we respond.
Right.
And even right now, where are many of the communities of color standing up against Supreme Court saying racial profiling is okay to mostly Latino people, right? And so that's happening right now. Right, ICE raids, like it's in such force and with such vehemence and vitriol that most people are just saying nothing. We're in shock, right?
Right. And that's ultimately work that we all have to do. Right. But now, how do we, people of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks, Latinos, white people, come together to have these conversations if we can deal with our differences? Right. And that's part of what I want to create is this opportunity for us to deal with our differences, to learn and grow and learn who we are and how I show up in the world. How many Latinos do we know that came to this country and stopped speaking their language? Right, from yesterday. I don't even know what my language is. And then how many Latinos know their indigenous language? Right? Because Spanish, just like English, is a colonizer's language, right? How do we help white people get past the shame and guilt felt in order to stay in conversations, to move past all of that and understand and look back in their family history to see when did my family give up their Irishness, their Italianness, their Frenchness for this thing called whiteness, and why? Right? And how do you acknowledge the stress that comes with this whole thing of saying, I got to be perfect, right? And all of that, right? How do we have these cross-cultural conversations with each other and stay in them to figure out our strategy for dealing with stuff, right? Oftentimes I believe that I see you, Mark, I'm still coming, Doc. Um, that we often look for simple solutions for complex issues, right? And we often, because of how we have been socialized in the system, we often have this one right way mentality. Instead of saying that, everyone on here has a right perspective. Now, how do we stay in conversation long enough so that we can get all of the 13 perspectives that's on this call marshaled to go in the same direction? Understanding that unity, now how's the phrase go? Um, now I can't, that unity does not mean that we all have to think the same way. Okay. Doc, you wanted to add something?
I'd like to hear what Mark has to say before I go, if that's
Okay.
okay.
Come on, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Rashawn. You made a distinction between social identity and cultural identity, and then you mentioned intersectional identity. So I'm curious, what is the relationship between intersectional identity, social identity, and cultural identity?
So when we think about intersectional identity, right? So I'm a male. I am of a certain age. I have a certain spiritual practice. I have a particular race, right? I have had a life of experiences, and all of those things have made up who I am. And that's the same with all of us. The social aspect of identity is who have we been told that we are? I'm Black because I was told that I was Black, right? I have Black folks show up in a particular way, stereotypes, because We've been told about these things, right? We've been told that white is right, and that these definitions that have been given are the true definition, right? Those things have been socialized in us. The cultural identity part says, let me begin to dissect all of this and look at it from a cultural standpoint and perspective. And then be able to say and recognize that I may have been socialized with this, but I understand this, right? So I was socialized in the blackness. I was black for a long time. And then one day it came to me, well, ultimately you're African. That's your cultural root, right? That's a landmass that I can identify with, a people, and understanding that black may be a political statement, right? So, and then beginning to look and say, okay, well, how is that impacting me and how I show up? What are the traditional values and belief systems that comes with this that may give me some agency, right? When I look at when I was 80 years old, sitting in the Catholic church that I grew up in, saying to myself, something is not right here. Y'all lying about something. Something is not right, right? Then and now I begin to look and say, well, what are the African spiritual systems, and how do they resonate with me? And understand that they resonate with me so much more and better, right? Because it's really about energy and nature and oneness, right? So, and that's part of the work for each of us, is to begin to pull all of those apart. How have I been socialized, and how is that impacting me? How do I explore this through the embodiment of cultural practices that are innate to me that I may have lost? And then how does all of that impact my different intersectional identities? Doc?
Thank you, Kevin. I just wanted to be respectful of people's time. I know that here at Mature Global Citizens, we are trying to get some information out. It's a lot of information, a lot of study. And like Kevin has said, it is a lifelong study. It's a lifelong journey for all of us. And all of us are brought to a time where we have to do our personal work seemingly out loud a lot of times. Um, and this time in our society is one of those times. I just wanted to make a point about what I feel is one of the foundational aspects of mature global citizen, and that is the personal transformational work. And that personal transformational work has a lot to do with exploring your own cultural narrative, whatever that is, and deeply exploring it. And to that end, um, my work, my recent work in cultural identity has been largely to working with Kevin and supporting Kevin. And I really echo what Cynthia said about when you get into that introspective work, it changes you from the inside out. So then the external, it takes away the mystery as to how you personally need to engage in the external work. So whether you're a community organizer or whether you're leading an organization or a corporation, you understand clearly where you stand and how you need to approach the work that you need to do. And so that whole cultural narrative piece is a big piece. Again, working with Kevin is always a joy to me because before we do something like this, I find myself moving into a preparation to be able to sit in this. Because, it's difficult sitting in these conversations at times. But for me, unlike Kevin that says, well, I'm built for this, I'm not built for this. For me, I'm ready to fight, and I have to really kind of, work with myself to be with that. And so I wanted to offer this to the group. Um, this weekend, I was led to go into some media that really spoke to me about what we're speaking to today. So the first one, I love movies from East India. And one was a comedy mystery called Murder Mubarak. And I'll put this in the chat for all of you. And what it dealt with was colonial settlers or settler colonialism, of how having a people come into your culture and take over your culture changes you from the inside out. So it's a mystery and it's funny, but they are really looking at the attitudes that Indian people have developed by the colonialism of the British, where they've taken on the British ways and tend to treat, the people who have money tend to treat their own people worse than the white folks did. And it's just looking at that, looking at how this living in this particular fishbowl affects us. The other is a book that I've worked with for the last couple of years called Black American History and Crime by D.C. Cannon. And it helps to orient us in a particular way to what happens when we, as Black people, look at our own culture and become critical and negative toward our own culture without looking at, again, the particular fishbowl that's helping to create that culture. Um, the third one is a movie that I really enjoyed called About My Father. And it's a comedy starring Robert De Niro. And it talks about immigration. So you have Italian immigrants and white immigrants. It is one of the first movies that I've seen where they say, yeah, no, you white immigrants. We're Italian immigrants, and this is our cultural narrative. But you are immigrants also. You white folks ain't from here, and you have a cultural narrative. And again, looking at that and looking at generational differences, the way we bring our children up to be good Americans, to get along in this society, to do better than we did, so forth and so on, and how when they embrace that in a particular way, it may not be what we were thinking for them. Maybe something totally different, right? And the last one is the first, I watched last night the first episode of Mr. Scorsese, which is showing on Apple TV. Everybody need to watch it. Watch that and have the book open, Black American History and Crime. Because in that cultural narrative, Scorsese, who has been a big part of the social conversation since I've been alive, who has impact on the society because of the movies that he's made, brings it to the fact that what he's done is give his cultural narrative. It is a cultural narrative that we in society as Black people have taken on and not known that we were engaged in somebody else's cultural narrative. Okay. It's a really interesting thing. I think it's about a 5-part documentary. And again, I've only watched the first part, but it was okay. This is something that is about the work we're doing. It's cultural narrative. You believe what you believe, you think the way you think, people interact with you the way they do because of cultural and societal narratives. that unless you understand that that's what's happening, and unless you are solid enough, anchored enough in your own cultural narrative to articulate a response, we can't have cross cultural conversations. And the cross cultural conversation is what we are trying to get to at Mature Global Citizens. So thank you, Kevin, for letting me speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're just about at time. It's only a couple of minutes. So I want to thank you all for showing up today. Please look out for the website or the website for, well, first off, depending on when or if you signed up on the website to get our newsletters, please, if you didn't, go back and do it. And there's a box there for SMS text. Please check that box. You would only get text messages if you sign up for an event just to get notices about the event. Right. That's it. It was not going to be no mass text messages or anything like that. Um, please sign up. Information will be coming out. If you found this valuable, and I hope you did. If you didn't, send me an email or something to say, Kevin, I didn't find any value in this, and tell me why, so that we can improve, right? Because that's the goal. We want to start this movement to counteract some of these things that we're dealing with that Vincent brought to the forefront, right? That's the goal. And ultimately, is how do we create this world that we all can move together better in, acknowledging each other and loving one another and moving forward. And this is, and I said loving one another, right? But this isn't one of those foo, let's just love each other type of things, right? That we hear sometimes. It's not that, right? Um, so I want to thank you all for being here. And please, uh, when you get information, if you can send it to others so that we can get people participating and moving and growing, right? Any last words from anyone else or that anyone wants to share?
Just thank you, Kevin. Um, this exploration of social identity and cultural identities, I think is timely. And often we talk at the intellectual level, but don't have language for what transforms and moves that personal shift forward.
Mm.
And I feel like the last two conversations have allowed us to get there, or at least me. I won't speak for anybody else. So I really appreciate that in light of our really nuanced Black identities. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. All right. Appreciate you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a
Yeah,
good day.
thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you, T.
Thank you, my brother.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Who's JC?